welcome on in, lacrosse fans, sports bettors alike. It's another Bet on Lacrosse live edition. I love it when we do this. It takes me back to my radio days, boys. I haven't hosted a radio show in probably, like a year and a half. But when we hop on the Twitter Spaces, love doing it. And this is a little something new that we've been doing. We've been putting out our thoughts live into the Twitter sphere. And at the end of each episode, we also allow you guys and gals to hop in and give us your thoughts on this weekend's NCAA and NLL slates. If you don't know me, I'm your host, Dan Alexander, and the boys are back in town. It's apropos. Tomorrow is St. Patty's Day, and the boys are back in town. Thin Lizzy. If you didn't know, they're actually an Irish band. So now you just learned a little something outside of the gold we're about to drop on your heads here. Again, I'm Dan Alexander, joined by FOS business writer Justin Byers and Hutton Jackson from Action Network. JB, I'll start with you, man. We're back at it, brother, and it feels good, man. How you doing tonight?
I'm feeling great. I'm feeling lucky. It's a pleasure to speak some lacrosse and some ball with you guys.
You're not lying, man. When this slate came out, because last week was like a pure pass week for me. I actually don't think, trying to rack my brain, I played one bet last weekend, and it was Johns Hopkins, and I got home with it. I was happy with that one, but it was a pure, like, as far as like public plays for me, I just didn't like anything on the board. So it was a great learning experience of, not forcing any plays, and I'm better because of it. I looked at this board, and man, I was licking my chops. Hutton, how are you doing, man? Thanks for joining us here as well. And were you as excited when you saw this slate? Because I think there is some juicy money-making opportunities this week, man.
Yeah, I'm excited about this weekend's slate. Last weekend, I also kind of stayed away. I kind of reached a little bit on Cornell minus 3.5. That didn't pan out. Thankfully, I had the NLL to save me last weekend, so I did decent last weekend because of the NLL, not because of NCAA, but definitely like the board this weekend a lot better. And we got a big game rematch from last year's championship I'm excited to talk about.
Yeah, I mean, that's like the entree, but there's so many apps and sides, and you can tell I haven't eaten dinner yet because that's all I'm thinking about is this slate and delicious slate of lacrosse we have. And again, I think there is not only some terrific games, like Hutton said, with that rematch of the national championship, potentially. We were talking before we started our space here, maybe even a preview of this year's national championship that'll be taking place this weekend as UVA and Maryland are squaring off. But there's some great kind of play going in the Ivy League this weekend. Great to see those teams back in action after being off for a year last year due to COVID. Does this fade Syracuse train continue? We'll be talking about that, and we'll also give some best bets. So if you're just joining us, this is your first time ever listening in to our Bet on Lacrosse Twitter space. We kind of do a wraparound. We talk a little bit of what happened last week, what we learned in the NCAA, both betting implications and just some macro stuff as well. We'll run down some different games that we're eyeing. If we have any plays in those, we'll give them. We'll give you your best bets, and then we'll swing things around to the indoor side of things. Talk a little box lacrosse, recap what took place as the NLL is rolling along. I mean, we're getting close to playoff time. Always exciting when that starts rolling around. We'll talk a little bit about some future markets. There's been some serious move there. Also, we're going to have Hutton break down the NLL trade deadline. I don't know if there's as much betting implications that we maybe learned from the NLL trade deadline, but there's definitely some movement as far as maybe feeling a little bit more confident on some of these teams or how some of these players are going to fit in. I always default to Hutton on that stuff. One of the best in the biz at not only breaking that news, but kind of analyzing what's the best. We have some plays for the NLL, and when we do all that, we're going to open it on up. You can drop in a request to join the Twitter space here as a speaker, and you can either throw us a little Q&A or you can give us some of your favorite plays for the weekend. Whatever, the time is yours. That's what we do to wrap each and every Bet on Lacrosse Twitter space that we do here. So without any further ado, let's get into it, boys and girls, and everybody that's listening in. It's the recap time. Man, JB, I'm going to throw it your way, man. What do we do with this Duke team? I mean, when it was Jacksonville who upset them, we were like, oh, it's a surging team early in the season. This always happens in February. And now Duke ends up losing to a Loyola team that's kind of sleptwalked, for lack of a better term, kind of sleptwalked through the start of the season. Another outright upset, and Duke was shellacked in that game, JB. What is going on there?
I have a lot of faith in this Duke team, and it's starting to dwindle because I'm not quite sure where this team is headed. Prior to the season, I placed a pretty large future on Duke to win it all, and now with this loss to Loyola, it's looking shaky. I'm not quite sure what to make of this team. We've seen some good lacrosse from them simply because they're too talented not to play well at some point. But we've also seen them play with their food and not finish games. That's exactly what we saw in Loyola. And you can't do that in April and May and expect to get very far, especially with the rest of the season they've got. They've got a tough slate where they go Towson, Syracuse, and North Carolina, and Notre Dame. They could potentially go 1-3 in that 4-game span. So this Syracuse team it's beatable, but this Duke team, if they don't get their act together, it's going to be a long rest of the season.
Now, I mean, I don't know if you have anything more to add to that part, Hutton. I think he kind of hit the nail on the head. Is you keep feeling like this Duke team is going to come alive a little bit, that they're finally going to shake out of it, and it's just starting to be real frustrating. If you're trying to back the Blue Devils, either you're a fan, either you have a future. It's just kind of been a major question mark around this team, and they haven't really answered that bell yet. Like you feel like these ACC teams, I look at them, I look at a UNC, and, I think you can explain it away a little bit more with a UNC who has some youth, who's had some shaky play in cage. With Duke, I mean, you have a solid face-off guy. You have a solid attack. You have some veterans on that back end too. It's a little head scratch in there. If you don't have anything else on Duke, you have anything else that you were kind of eyeing this weekend, or any thoughts on just how Duke's kind of been sleepwalking and really hasn't woken up, Hutton?
Yeah, I mean, one thing too to consider is, some of Duke's players actually played other sports in the spring or in the fall. That kind of maybe, coming in the spring, there's not as much chemistry. I don't know. That could be kind of a recipe. They also have a lot of talent. And sometimes talent alone doesn't, win you games. So I don't know. They're a head scratcher for me. For the meantime, I'm definitely not going to be necessarily fading them, but I'm going to avoid any games that they're in, I think, for the meantime, because I just don't know what I'm getting each week. Like this game, on paper, I looked at it. I'm like, I kind of like Towson plus 4.5 against Duke. But Towson hasn't been that great either. They've kind of been inconsistent. So it's a game where I could see Duke coming out like after a tough loss to Loyola and really, pounding the Towson Tigers, or you could see Towson, who beat Loyola earlier this season, making it a game. So, for right now, I don't know if I'm necessarily on the fade the Blue Devils train, but I'm definitely avoiding games that they're in. I know before we get to the UVA Maryland game, another game I'm looking at, Syracuse, Stony Brook. Syracuse is a team that I'm thinking about fading just because they have been getting very favorable spreads, and they haven't been covering. They've played some tough opponents, so, I don't want to take anything away from them. I don't think Stony Brook's going to be the toughest team they face this year, but at -2.5, I don't know if it's time to maybe start fading Syracuse. That's kind of where I'm looking right now. But those are my thoughts.
Yeah, and I'm glad that you bring up Syracuse there, because as I mentioned at the top, my one lone bet that I placed, my one lone bet I won, was on Johns Hopkins kind of spoiling the big homecoming, right? Petro's coming to town. This staff is incredible. What are we getting? They're going to be laying a herd on them. It's payback time. It's revenge. This is why I really wish I would have made Hopkins an official play, because it's the exact type of situation I love fading. When all the narratives are going one way and everybody's talking about the homecoming, that was more important to me than any thing that was going to happen on the field. There is when there's a lot of hype, when there's a lot of momentum going one way, where it seems like all fans are buying into one narrative that here comes the homecoming. I love fading that kind of stuff, and I feel like the more likely thing that was going to happen was Hopkins going to rise to the bell, or was Syracuse going to have a letdown in a spot that everyone was overhyping. I personally thought the latter. I put my money where my mouth was, and that was the lone ticket that I cashed. So I'm not sure, if it was more of a, it's fade Syracuse time thing for me, or if it was more just, hey, this spot set up really nicely. I think you guys have a pretty decent case coming up here in a little bit, maybe why you might look towards Stony Brook. One other thing before we move on and talk about how last weekend we had the first ever live betting opportunity, and I want to know if you guys got any live bets in. But really, the thing to kind of wrap it is just, Syracuse. I don't know. I'll save that for when we talk about the Stony Brook game, because I have some serious thoughts about that, and I do want to get to this live betting. So last weekend we tweeted it out from our Bet On Lacrosse account that the alert was sounded. We all ran to our DraftKings accounts because for the first time ever, we had some live wagering opportunities. It was Ohio State. It was taken on Notre Dame. So before I get your guys' thoughts and see, did you guys even get in on this? I feel like it was just interesting to me that the one game that was offered, the one game that there was live betting opportunities, was a game featuring Notre Dame, and Notre Dame now drops to 1-2. They're falling out of the sky quickly here. And what was everybody thinking? Well, Notre Dame can't possibly lose this game. They were favorites beforehand. So DraftKings probably got a boatload of Notre Dame money, throwing that up as a live line, because there was a lot of people who were just saying, oh my God, the comeback is on. The comeback is real. This was a huge lead by Ohio State. And how many people probably just opened that up, saw, oh my goodness, live betting opportunity, hammer Notre Dame. I would argue that might have been DraftKings' best side win. And I don't have any numbers to reflect this or anything, but I just think when you have a public team like Notre Dame that has a lot of support, they probably have a lot of futures exposure on Notre Dame as well. If they know that this is a team people like hammering, they probably cleaned up on Notre Dame money, as Ohio State still ends up getting the outright win. So Hutton, I'll throw it back your way. Did you try getting in any bets? Were you able to get any live bets? Because I didn't like anything enough. I still wanted to hit Ohio State. By the time I got there, the value was kind of dried up. So were you able to get anything in? Did you get under the wire?
No, I was close. The key thing, too, with live betting for people that haven't done it before is make sure you're watching the game on, a stream that is the most close to the actual game, because I was just following on my phone, saw an opportunity where Ohio State went up. They were up 8-7, went to go place. They were plus 110 on the money line still, despite being up by a goal, because, going into the game, they were underdogs. I'm like, oh, that's a good spot. Go to place the bet, and it had already been closed out. Just missed it, just barely. And then they dropped down to minus 105 because they had just scored a goal. I think it was minus 105, minus 110. They just gone up 9-7. Kind of thought about it, but I feel like, I don't know about you guys, but whenever I have an opportunity to get plus money on a live line and then the team goes up higher and I lose out on that value, it turns me off. So I end up not betting on it because I still thought, there's a chance Notre Dame comes back. I don't want to I like betting the live plus money when I can, for an underdog that's got the lead. It's rare that you get those. Whenever they're available, I try to hit them, but no, I did not. Long story short, I did not get a live bet in, unfortunately.
So that was the long way of being like, just missed it. just like the Twitter account jumped back at you. Well, I'm hoping we get some live opportunities. I wouldn't be shocked with how marquee this UVA and Maryland matchup is if they don't throw up a live line if somebody gets up pretty big in this game, because I think it's going to be a seesaw back and forth, and I think that's a great segue. Start looking at some of the action this week as we kind of got a retrospective of what happened last week. And JB, I'm throwing it your way. It's UVA, it's Maryland, and I think I'm standing on an island because I feel like you and my boy Hutton are all wahooed up. What as far as the betting implications, sure, for this game, but figures to be a terrific matchup, the championship rematch, a potential championship preview. It's Virginia, it's Maryland, and it's Justin Byers of FOS Sports. What are you thinking, man?
I'm looking at this game in two ways. Maryland has the better lacrosse players. Virginia has the better athletes. And I think Virginia's going to get up and down the field this Saturday and kind of wear out Maryland in between the lines, getting ground balls. They do the little things well, and I think that's going to be the difference. Don't get me wrong. Tillman's a wonderful coach. As we all know, he's gotten Maryland to multiple championship games and has also gotten them a championship. So he's no fluke, and he's going to have his team prepared. But the run that Virginia is on right now is just no one's really matching it. There's no other team I've been able to watch and see compete with a team that's playing with the speed that Virginia has. And for that reason, I'm leaning that way. And I love this Cavaliers team because they play the game the right way, and they do it on all three phases, whether it be face-offs, defense, and offense. They're all the way fluid, and I think that's the reason why they pull it up over Maryland.
Ah, man. I mean, you make the compelling case there. I think also a great point that you make, obviously, about, lacrosse players versus athletes. I think that's a hard one to disagree with there. Hutton, I know that the second this line came out, you and I were already saying we're not speaking the entire week because it's rivalry week for you and me. I'm kidding, of course. I mean, that's one of my favorite things about sports betting is the odds makers put up a line. We get to bet what we think. Differing opinions, I'm all for it. It sounds like Justin started making the case for you. Are you going to finish the case for backing the Wahoos?
First say, although we disagreed on the side, we did agree on that a lot of Virginia was going to come in early.
Yep.
It was going to, move the line a little bit, which it did. That's why I tried grabbing UVA as early as I could. I still only got them at minus 120, so I assume they opened up at minus 110. By the time I saw it, it was minus 120 already. So, that kind of tended to go the way we expected. It's minus 130 now, so it hasn't moved a ton. But it was originally minus 120. It was plus 120 on the money line. Now it's plus 110. So I ended up putting a unit on the money line as well as 1.2 units on the spread, expecting it to move. And I think what it comes down to, I agree with a lot of what Justin's saying. I think if I was to look at this ahead and if I was to make the odds, I probably would have made UVA the favorite. But from the pure numbers perspective, I just think any team that was getting the plus 1.5 seems like the favorable play to me because I think these teams are so evenly matched. I think it's going to be a 1-goal game. So that's why I like backing UVA plus 1.5. I do think they could win as well straight up. But I just think if this line was flipped, and Maryland was getting the plus 1.5, I think I might have been maybe looking the other way just because I think this game is going to be so tight. But if I have to pick, I do like UVA in this game to win against Maryland.
So I'm right there with you, man, as far as, making sure that you stay with your bankroll, whatever your unit size is, you're going there. Where I'm not with you is I'll be the lone detractor. I'll be the Terps guy. And for me, I was just talking about how I love bucking public narratives, and I don't think there's a bigger public narrative currently than Virginia's this powerhouse that's just rolling over people. Like, the scoreboards indicate that, but they've caught some teams in some really advantageous spots for Virginia. I mean, you got to win against Air Force. You rolled Air Force in their first game. Amazing. High Point. You end up beating High Point by 1 goal. I mean, I think people are kind of forgetting that High Point took them down the wire. You play against Towson, you blow them out. It was Towson's kind of right out of the gate as well. You show Syracuse, who we're all on this kind of fade Syracuse bandwagon. They were the ones who exposed Syracuse for what they are. They roll up on Johns Hopkins in a look-ahead spot where they were thinking about how, we got Petro coming to town. And then in the UNC game, they were losing at halftime. I understand they ended up rolling, but with 1 goal scored in the second half, how much of that win was UNC losing the game? I mean, I was just watching that game baffled at what I was seeing offensively for North Carolina, out of sorts. Chris Gray, who, for as amazing as he is, really ball dominant. And when things started going sideways, just the body language really kind of showing that the game had maybe already been lost in his mind. So I get it. This Virginia team is 6-0. They're getting a lot of respect. They're getting a lot of love because of what they've been able to accomplish. But this is still a Maryland team who there were some players on that team that remembered how their season ended last year. And now they get another shot at Virginia. They get it on, a Saturday afternoon in Washington, D.C., neutral site. So we'll still kind of have that allure of being a big game, being not at either team stadium. So I don't know. I think you guys have both talked me at least out of laying a goal and a half, because I think this is a coin flip game through and through. I think what I'm hoping and what I still expect to happen is there will be some solid public money that's going to be coming in on Virginia come Saturday. Once bettors start rolling out of bed, they start getting some coffee in them, they start, working the seltzers out from the night before, and they're trying to decide, what am I hammering today? They all get in their group chats, and there's one guy who's on like a 0-6 run is talking about how UVA is a wagon. It's max bet time. I just feel like there's still some money that's going to be coming on UVA. If I'm able to get Maryland around even like a pick'em price of -110 on just straight up to win the game, I'm going to hammer that. If I'm getting more than like +110, I'll maybe sprinkle a half unit size Maryland -1.5. But I think the case you guys have made Virginia is enough to make me think, hey, I don't know if either team should be laying a goal and a half in a game like this. But if you're just picking a coin flip winner, I'll be the lone detractor. I'll be the Maryland guy. And then the next space that we have, you guys will either get to have me brag, or we'll get to say, Dan, we tried to tell you, man. And if anybody knows the Terps, it's my man Hutton. So that's what kind of makes me a little worried that I'm the one on the Terps island. But any other thoughts to kind of wrap that game, boys, before we get to what to make of the Ivy Leagues? A lot of Ivy League matchups. If you guys have anything else to counter back to my soliloquy for the Terps there.
This is one of the games, like, on paper where it's so tough to judge that usually those type of games scare me off, where I don't want to play anything. But it's such a marquee matchup that I think could be a fun game for people that maybe are just starting to get in to betting. Again, don't throw a lot of money on it. Just, kind of go with your gut, see what you like in this game, and then enjoy following along on lacrosse Twitter and stuff. Because I think this is, like you said, a marquee matchup that it's going to be fun to bet on, and fun to kind of have a side, especially if you're, kind of neutral. I grew up kind of liking the Marylands, my dad went to Navy. I kind of grew up watching those teams or whatever. Then being from Virginia, not all the way down in Charlottesville, but, UVA was another team that I enjoyed watching. So being able to pick a side in this game and have a rooting interest, especially if you're just a general lacrosse fan, I think betting can kind of make that a lot more fun. So that's something that I would kind of watch with this game, because normally, we're going to get in the Ivy Leagues, a lot of tough games to handicap here too. Normally I'd stay away from tough games like this, but this is such a game that you don't really want to miss out on, the narrative and the fun of, interact with other people that are betting on this game as well.
JB, give us the final word on the matchup of all matchups before we get into some Ivy Leagues. I said a lot there in the case of Maryland. Anything to wrap it for the folks before we keep on rolling here?
Yeah, I mentioned this in our discussion earlier. Whoever wins this game, I think, is going to win a national championship. Unless Duke really gets it together, and maybe if Georgetown really lives up to what they could be, I think either Maryland, if they win this game, they're probably going to go and win it. And if Virginia does, it'll be a three-peat, so we'll see.
I think it sounds like he's emotionally hedging that Duke future in live time. He's at the top.
Got to.
That Duke future isn't looking good. So now he has 3 teams potential. But no, I think you make a great point there. And I also think Hutton and I are both, as we look at this Ivy League slate this weekend, some interconference play, going to be some terrific matchups, and they're lining it the same kind of way. Coin flip games. Cornell, 1.5-point favorites as they're taking on Yale. Harvard, 1.5-point favorites as they're taking on Brown. Princeton, 1.5-point favorites as they're taking on Penn. If there's any that are really actionable for me there, I would maybe lean with Princeton, but again, I'm just not crazy in these kind of coin flip games to be laying anything. I think there's a lot of good games that are going to go on there, but I don't know if I can make a case for betting any of them. What about you, JB?
There's a lot of potential for some money to be made with these Ivy League games, simply because the odds are so great. Like if you pick one underdog, you win 2 out of these 3 underdogs, and you're in good business. And, there's, like you're saying, there's not one game that really sticks out that I really want to dive into or something I feel like really committed to. But I think getting Penn at plus money in an interconference game isn't a bad look. I know Princeton's played really well, but Penn's also got a pretty impressive win over Duke, and they can compete with the best of them. So I think there's some value there with Penn. And also, I kind of like Harvard, getting them at pretty much a pick 'em with Brown. Harvard's shown me some flashes, especially in that game against Ohio State. And we know Ohio State's a good team, and if Harvard can go to the wire with them, then I think Harvard's got themselves a pretty good squad. So I'm leaning Harvard in that matchup against Brown. And Yale, we know how good Yale is and how good they've been in the past and how well they're coached. And their matchup against Cornell, it's a tough one. Cornell's buzzing right now. I've watched a couple of their games and they've really, really played well. They share the ball. They've got a really good thing going up there in Ithaca. But the fact that Yale is what they are, I'm really looking at that plus 1.5. Like we were saying with Maryland, Virginia, I think Yale Cornell could be a 1-goal game. So if I'm really looking at this slate when it comes to the Ivy League teams, I'm leaning towards Penn. And honestly, I'm kind of falling in love with Harvard.
All right. There's nothing more fun than when you start breaking down a matchup and you're like, yeah, I don't really have a play. And then as you talk about the matchup, you're like, oh, wait, how did I not see this play before? I feel like you make a good point about this Penn team. Maybe I'm kind of shortchanging some of their wins. And, I'm also kind of shortchanging that they played Georgetown first game out of the gate in a 2-goal game, in a game that I think they were like 2.5-point underdogs, something like that, maybe even more. I'll have to go back and check that. So they've been great in a dog roll, rolling 3 straight wins and now moving on into interconference play, interleague play. I think that's definitely a good look that you have there. Now, Hutton, anything you're kind of eyeing here in the Ivy League or anything, especially in that Princeton-Penn matchup, anything that kind of stands out to you?
So I don't think I'm going to touch any of these games. I think these are games I'm going to be, tuned in on because it's going to tell me a lot about these teams. I think right now the Ivy League feels like any team can beat any team. So, Princeton comes out and wins big against Penn, I can, kind of move them up. If Cornell wins big, I kind of move them up, but if Yale upsets them, I think I'm going to probably try to learn a lot more about these teams and, keep my hands off of these 3 games, learn a lot more about these 6 teams. But that's kind of how I feel. But, Justin mentioning his Duke future kind of brought back kind of something we kind of discovered last week is I'm currently in Jersey and some people are in Virginia. You can't bet on current colleges that are in your state for New Jersey or Virginia. Well, here we got Princeton and Rutgers looking pretty good. And UVA, we're already ready to kind of think they're going to be making it back to the Final Four. So if you're placing a future bet in Virginia and Virginia makes it to the championship, along with whichever team you bet on, let's say, you bet on Maryland to make it to the championship and you're in Virginia and both Virginia and Maryland make it, you win that futures bet. It goes to the runner-up. If a Virginia team makes it to the championship. Same in New Jersey. Depending on who loses this Maryland-Virginia game, I might jump on and hopefully their odds move a little bit. So if Maryland loses, maybe I place a future on Maryland thinking that they're still, a good team. They just lost to a good Virginia team. But if, let's say, I place a future on Maryland and they end up playing Rutgers or Princeton in the championship, I win that bet. I don't need Maryland to win. So that's something interesting just for people that are living in New Jersey or Virginia, or really any state that doesn't allow you to bet on a state college. That's the same case. But those are some notable ones because we do believe Virginia can be a Final Four team, and Rutgers and Princeton are probably right around there as well.
Great points all around right there. All right, last game we're going to preview before we get you some best bets on the NCAA slate. Then we'll shift gears, talk a little NLL, and get you out of here. Before we end the Twitter space, you can also drop a request to be a speaker right here on our Bet On Lacrosse Twitter space, and we'll open it up for a little Q&A, and you can also share some of your favorite plays of the week there, too. The Fade Syracuse train has gotten a lot of passengers over the last few weeks. The conductor working overtime to punch all those tickets there. They're 2.5-point favorites against Stony Brook. And I think probably Hutton. I'm going to throw it back your way, and then I'll get Justin's thoughts before we kind of wrap it, and then get our favorite plays for the weekends. But I've tried explaining away some of the issues with Syracuse. For me, it ends up more just that they're not there yet. You know what I mean? The coaching staff is exciting. It's going to be great down the line. But in lacrosse, especially in Division I lacrosse, talent is always going to win out. And not to knock anybody who's on that roster or anything like that. They don't have enough talent in enough places to really be competing against the top flight team. Now, is Stony Brook a top flight team? Not quite there yet, but Hutton, what are you thinking about this squad as you're looking at Syracuse laying the 2.5 against Stony Brook?
Yeah, I just think, they're a solid team. They're just not as good as we think they were. I think they had a big win against Holy Cross, and we thought, okay, maybe this is, Syracuse's time to shine or whatever. Then they, lose to Army, not a bad loss. But, just as we progressed, I just think we've seen more and more that they're not a bad team. They're just an average team. But right now, they're getting spreads that, make it seem like they're, top 15 team. And right now they're barely, even in the top 20. So that's kind of how I feel about it. Right now, I'm leaning Stony Brook plus 2.5, just because it's minus 105. I think Stony Brook can cover. Stony Brook, took Rutgers down to the wire. Rutgers is a top 10 team. So I think Stony Brook is legit. I might wait, though, because, I still think I might be able to get Stony Brook plus 3.5, and I'd feel much more comfortable with that than I would 2.5. But right now, I see the Stony Brook 2.5, and that's kind of where I'm leaning in this one. I just think, Syracuse, just like you said, they're, down the line when they get Joey Spallina coming, in a couple years, like, they're going to get some of these recruits. They're going to be legit. I think it's going to take some time. But right now, too, not having Owen Hiltz in that lineup, I think hurts them. And again, I don't think they're a bad team. I just don't think they're all that like we thought they were at the beginning of the season.
JB, are you sick of trying to back this Syracuse team either monetarily or just be like, well, that coaching staff, man, they got to figure it out? Like, what's your vibe around this Syracuse team?
I'm officially done with them. I've got no love for them anymore. It's out the window. I've given them about 6 weeks, and they've given me nothing. And my heart can't take it anymore. And I'm like looking at these stats right now, and Syracuse, of course, they're going to be talented at Syracuse University Lacrosse. And they've got a roster of almost 60 kids, which is huge for a lacrosse team. It's almost 20 plus bodies more than the average college lacrosse team. So they've got numbers and they've got talent. But looking at these stats, it's all the hustle plays. I just don't think they play with enough effort. They're clearing the ball at 86%, which, for some teams that's good, but at Syracuse, that needs to be around 95. They're getting outnumbered on ground balls, which that's just effort in itself. That's like rebounding. You either get it or you don't. And they're also they're losing the turnover battle. They've got some cost turnovers that are good numbers, but it's not stacking up to their opponents and what they've been able to put up. And also, they've been terrible on man up. Only getting man up goals at 35% when you've had 17 opportunities so far this season, only seeking 6 goals from that. That's disappointing. So there's a lot of things from the Syracuse team that leave the desired. Like I just don't think they're a good team from a X and O standpoint. They've got the talent, it's just not there.
Yeah, I think you guys laid it out there perfectly. I'm leaning with you on Stony Brook. I think I'm just staying away from the game, honestly. I feel like, Syracuse, with the staff they have, with the talent they have, with what JB was just laying out there, the statistic profile kind of matches what you're seeing with the eyes, and that's just they're not doing enough right now. And I don't know if that's enough for me to end up putting a bet on it. I'll probably stay away from that one. But we do have some actionable info for you listening in. Our best bet segment coming up here. Favorite NCAA plays for the weekend. Then we're going to recap, talk a little NLL, a little NLL trade deadline, give you some favorite plays there. And then we'll throw open some Q&A for you to join in as well. You can just drop that little request button to join as a speaker. We'll get you in here at the end, and you can give us some of your favorite plays for the week. JB, our esteemed guest, front office sports, business writer, I give you the floor, man, because this is a play. I don't want to steal none of your thunder that I'm eyeing as well. Best bet time, Justin Byers. What do you got for the folks?
I knew I was in good business when we were seeing eye to eye on this play. And we're taking Utah plus 5.5. Any team that's getting 5.5 points, I don't care what kind of loss they're coming off of. In college lacrosse, that's a gimme. These games all season, no matter who's been playing, some of them have been tight. And teams are competing, and you've seen a lot of teams that don't usually win big games succeed. And I think that's the case here. I think Utah, they've got some pretty impressive wins so far this season. They play well. They've got pretty well-rounded team, I'd say. They could be a little bit better offensively at some points, but I mean they've got a great goalie that stands on his head and keeps them in games. So that's why I'm leading here with actually I'm not leading, I'm all in on Utah plus 5.5.
Yeah, and I will even, go that step further and just mention the fact that this Utah lacrosse team, I've been very high on them all year long. Last week, they end up losing outright. And guess what? It was the same week that they were favorites. I've talked about this a lot, that there's some teams that just thrive in the underdog role. And I'm not saying that Utah is sitting in their locker room and saying, look at what the odds makers think about us. I'm just saying when it seems like it's a game that they are counted out in, they seem to rise to that. They kind of have that chip on their shoulder kind of feel with that team. They've been a terrific underdog this year. All of their outright wins coming as underdogs. And now they're getting 5.5 goals against a Georgetown team who's solid, don't get me wrong, but they've shown, some cracks in their armor as well. And I also think if Utah did cover the spread, they did win outright against UMBC, you're not seeing 5.5 in this. This is a major value play that is a market overreaction to what happened last week. I, like JB, favorite play of the week for me is Utah plus 5.5. Another spot that I like, and I know this is going to give some people agita. You need your Tums if you're going to roll with me on this play. It's Notre Dame laying 2.5 goals. I mean, Hutton laid out a case earlier this year on looking to fade Michigan. Is Michigan for real? And I just feel like this is a shot for Notre Dame to really right the ship. I mean, they are on a skid. I misspoke earlier when I said they were 1-2. They're actually 1-3. I was shocked to even know that. That's why I was discounting them. One, they're on a 3-game losing streak right now, and now they get back home. This is a chance for them to kind of right all those wrongs. You have a big win against a team that's getting a lot of public support that a lot of people are thinking, oh my goodness, here comes Michigan. This is also a play I would wait to place. I think people are going to roll onto their apps in that same kind of way that I was talking about and say, oh my goodness, Michigan against this. You guys know, Notre Dame's 1-3. They've lost 3 straight games. I mean, it's going to be all of these different narratives of why you should fade and take the points. That's why I'm going to back Notre Dame. I'm going to wait till the last minute to place this. Might even get the 1.5, but I would even be comfortable laying the 2.5. I think this is a major bounce back spot for Notre Dame. Again, maybe we should get our Twitter spaces and maybe my best bets sponsored by Tums, because you don't feel good about placing this bet. It makes you a little sick, but Notre Dame laying the 2.5. My secondary best bet for this week. So I'm rolling with Justin, and since we didn't want to shortchange you and only give you one play, but that 100% is my best bet this week. Notre Dame laying the 2.5. Hutton, what are you thinking? Your best bet on the pitch, on the field this week before we take a little peek indoors to talk a little box lacrosse in the NLL.
I've leaned a lot of different ways on a lot of these games. And one of them was this Notre Dame minus 2.5. And I think you kind of convinced me to kind of go all in on that as well. I think Notre Dame is due for a win. I think, if their record was better, they'd be getting, a larger spread against this team. So, yeah, I'm leaning Notre Dame, or I'm going in on Notre Dame minus 2.5 too. I just think this team's due for a win. Like I said, they played some tough competition other than, Detroit Mercy, who they, blew out in the first game of the season. They played some tough opponents. And I think Michigan is a good spot for them to get right. I got burned when I faded Michigan against Delaware. I think that says more about Delaware not being as good, though, than does Michigan. Michigan, recently kind of came down to earth a little bit against Harvard. So that's where I like Notre Dame minus 2.5 here. And this is one, too, where it's, like you said, might be better to wait. But right now the spread does say, it's minus 140. So, I don't know how much longer you do want to wait. If I'm myself, I might actually play this now and then see, put a little bit on it now and see what happens because, if you're getting Notre Dame minus 3.5, I still like it, but always feels a little bit better when you get minus 2.5.
Yeah, that is the risk you run when you're waiting for the markets. The market, feels great when you read the market and you nail the play, but sometimes you lose 1 point of value. That's the difference of winning by a half point or losing by a half point. Good point made there by Hutton. Utah plus 5.5. Notre Dame laying the 2.5. Some best bets from the squad here. He's Hutton Jackson from the Action Network. I'm Dan Alexander from Wager Talk and Gambling.com. We also got Justin Byers from Front Office Sports. Thanks for rolling with us here. We got a little NLL talk before we open it up for a little Q&A, and you can drop your favorite plays for this weekend. I'm going to have Hutton run a little bit more point on this one, but as far as the NLL, last week, good week to be an underdog. The Firewolves, PCLC, a.k.a. Panther City, and the New York Riptide all getting the 1.5 as underdogs. They don't only cover that 1.5. I love the Riptide boys. That's the one team in NLL that I've been like cashing on because I love my underdogs, and they have been solid in that underdog role. Finally, they get some outright wins to come with it. But all those teams get these straight-up wins as underdogs. And, there was some solid action, some other upsets that we were looking at, and also, Hutton, some movement in the future markets before we talk a little trade deadline heat-up action. What were you seeing in the NLL this past weekend?
Not to toot my own horn, but I felt like I read this weekend pretty well. It was a lot of, games that we had seen before, whereas, you saw the Firewolves play Halifax before. Wasn't as bold enough to take them on the money line, but I felt really comfortable taking them at plus 1.5. And they ended up winning outright again against the Thunderbirds. Thunderbirds were down when these two teams first played. So that was kind of, my hesitation with maybe taking them on the money line. But this Firewolves team can beat anybody. We're going to talk about them a little bit later, but they've shown that they're good enough to beat anybody despite right now having a losing record. They're sitting still in a playoff spot. It's really going to come down to them, the Swarm and the Wings, Wings right now are reeling. They have not been a good team to bet on recently. But likewise, the Riptide are another team I've loved betting on. This game particularly was one that I loved because I thought they should probably have been the favorites against the Nighthawks, despite losing the Nighthawks earlier in the season. I just think they've been playing better. They've been playing tighter games. And then you added in, I had already placed a bet on this. I ended up doubling down because Rylan Hartley, the goaltender for the Nighthawks, went out. He wasn't going to suit up. So it just looked more and more better as it was going along. And it was funny. We actually had, I believe, an error on BetMGM's part. So usually DraftKings puts their lines out for NLL a little bit earlier. BetMGM then kind of follows suit, and they had mixed up the juice when they were doing this. And so you could have gotten. Originally, I was like, I like the Riptide, on the money line. I think, there's probably going to be a little bit more value there. The Riptide on the money line were plus 105, and they had accidentally instead of giving Riptide plus 1.5, making it minus 140, they swapped it, and it was plus 115. So you could get Riptide plus 1.5 for a better value than you could on the money line. So I ended up hammering hard that Riptide plus 1.5. It was the most I had put down on one single team game, and it paid off. They ended up winning outright. I would have backed them on the money line if it was better value, but if you're getting plus 115 as opposed to plus 105, you got to take the points there. And sure enough, it had switched. Like a few day later, they finally did adjust it correctly to what it should have been, and you had to pay minus 140 to get that plus 1.5. So it pays to line shop because in this instance it was an error. But even when there aren't errors and there's actually just better value on other sports books, it pays just to shop around. But those were my two favorite plays. And then I didn't see Panther City coming, but that was another big win. They're currently 3-0, so that might be a tease of where I'm going this week.
Yeah, and I think also with now we're starting to get down the line and playoffs are starting to come into form a little bit more. I think, before we talk a little bit of a future move, and maybe if you've been listening to Bet on Lacrosse, you have a potential money-making opportunity with a pretty solid ticket in your pocket that we're going to talk about here in just a second. He points out there, JB, even just more of a industry thing about really shopping around for lines, because sometimes you'll be able to find these little market inefficiencies. And, it's not to take advantage of the bookmaker or say, oh, you made a big mistake, so I'm going to, hammer you both hands and whatever. It's just, if you're a savvy bettor and you have more outs than just one book, more often than not, you're going to set yourself up to be successful. So I'm just wondering, with where you're at, how many sports betting outs do you potentially have? And do you try and, if not place on all of those different outs, at least be aware of maybe what the different lines are that are out there, not only in NLL lacrosse, but just as more of a macro betting thing, because we not only aim to help you cash tickets, we aim to make you better bettors each and every week. Do you try shopping around for lines, or is how your market is, you really have one provider and, damned if you do, damned if you don't?
I'm actually huge on line shopping, and that's the best way to kind of get better as a gambler and also learn more about what you're doing and how you're doing it. And I think it's good to kind of gauge how you're going to spend your money and the return you're getting. The more you're able to do that, the more you're able to kind of get an edge. And for example, today there's a Dortmund Mainz game, and I think there was a live line that DraftKings had at over 1.5 goals plus 200, and it just might have been a glitch, but of course I'm going to take that when Dortmund's playing. And within 5-6 minutes it cashed. So that just goes to show you that it's important to kind of look at your book and the movements, looking while you're watching a game. That's going to kind of help you get a better experience out of betting as well. You're going to have a lot more fun. You're going to be able to exhaust all your resources a lot better.
Yeah, and it's tough too with lacrosse. Like, this is more general betting, because with lacrosse you really only have DraftKings for these college lines, whereas NLL you have DraftKings and BetMGM. But it does pay to kind of check, because I've noticed that BetMGM tends to be a little bit more favorable. If you wait, their odds tend to come out a little bit later than DraftKings, but you end up getting a little bit more value if you wait. And then even though we're not getting BetMGM giving college lines weekly, they actually have future odds up too. So if you like a team, it's future odds, and you're looking on DraftKings, you're like, I wish it was a little bit better. Check BetMGM. They have college future lines or future odds up there as well. And you might be able to get a little bit more value there too. So it pays just to check. This is more for betting on other sports, just because we really only have 2 sportsbook providers. But once the PLL rolls around, we'll probably have a little bit more. And actually NLL too has Caesars. So that's 3 there in the NLL. I think PLL last year we had around 4 or 5 different books. So definitely pays to line shop, even though you can't really do it too much in the college season.
Yeah, I think another terrific point, because again, we're trying to help you be able to be a just savvy bettor. That's what it's all of us versus the guy at the counter who hopefully is paying us more money than we're ending up paying him. So some good kind of macro stuff there. Now, Hutton, you kind of alluded to the futures there. We, a while ago, were talking about potentially placing a future on the Firewolves, not only just because we thought they were maybe a team that was trending upwards a little bit, but also just at a sheer value standpoint. Plus 2,500, it's now all the way down to plus 1,600. So, lost, about 900 there worth of value. And I'm just wondering, as now that ticket is in our pocket, are you feeling better about it? Are you feeling worse? And as playoffs are starting to come into shape, trade deadline just passed as well. How do you feel about that ticket, and what's it kind of shaping up? If people are holding that ticket, what kind of opportunities are we potentially eyeing up, being able to make some money down the stretch on, if not that cashing, which would be just as nice. I'll take that, but maybe some other ways that we could potentially hedge out maybe some of the matchups that they could potentially be facing.
Yeah, I mentioned the Firewolves are still on the bubble. They're a bubble team, but right now they have some quality wins and they're looking great. And I think really they can beat anybody. So I'm feeling great about getting in at that plus 2,500. Now plus 1,600, I still kind of like it. And I think this is where you want to start looking at which teams do you really think can make a playoff run, and where can you get value? Because right now you're looking at the board, you have the Bandits, Thunderbirds, Seals, and Rock are all kind of like those top 4 teams where you got Bandits are the favorites at plus 250, Thunderbirds and Seals are both plus 350, and Rock are plus 500. Now, if you really think those teams are going to win it all, which I think those are, arguably the top 4 teams in the league, go ahead, place it on one, and open up some hedge opportunities later down the road. But I think, too, it's fair to look at, the Swarm are in a pretty good position to make a playoff spot. They're plus 3,000. They're even worse than the Firewolves. Now, I think the Firewolves are a better team, so that's where I'm leaning Firewolves here. But you got another team like the Warriors who, we've been talking about. They've kind of looked a little bit worse as the season's gone along, but they're still plus 3,000. They're a team that is in a good spot to win the playoff spot too. Whereas there's other teams with longer odds, like the Rush, Roughnecks, and Panther City. They could actually all potentially still make the playoffs, but they're a risk. You're risking your future dying before the playoffs even start. So that's where, right now, if I'm looking to place a future, it's really be on the Firewolves, Swarm, or maybe even the Mammoth at plus 1,200, just because of the value standpoint. But I feel great about Firewolves because Firewolves get in at the 7th or 8th seed. They could potentially play Bandits, Thunderbirds, or Seals. Those are probably going to be the top 3 teams. They've beaten the Thunderbirds twice. They beat the Seals 2 weeks ago, and they took the Bandits down to the wire, only losing by 1 in their second matchup. So I feel great about the Firewolves, especially if they are able to, upset one of those teams in the first round. Then you get into the playoff series in the semis, and that, future gets even more valuable because if they go up in a series, you can hedge by playing the other side. So, whether it's the Firewolves or one of these teams with longer odds that are in, a good spot to make the playoffs, I think it's really a good opportunity right now that we kind of know what these teams are. We've had enough to see what they were. Some of these teams like the Rush, if you got in early on them, you're really kicking yourself because they were like plus 550 at the start of the season. And here they are, plus 4,000, probably not going to even make the playoffs. They're last in the West. So that's why it sometimes pays to wait. Like we mentioned on that futures episode we did, a long time ago, it pays to wait sometimes.
Yeah, and that's perfect example with how fluid and liquid futures markets are. That's why as far as preseason futures, they're fun because you get to show your buddies, oh my goodness, I'm a genius. I called him from the beginning of the season. As far as value, unless you have some really good information-driven stuff, I'm just not really crazy about betting futures. Now, as far as matchups this week, it's a solid slate. I don't have any official plays, so I'll let you kind of see if you have anything that's a little bit more actionable. But as far as the matchups this week, I'm just sad I don't have the Bandits to just hammer the Bandits. That's been one of my favorite things to do is just take the Chaos version as the box lacrosse team and just hammer them with 2 fists. It's worked really well for me. So then I had to actually dive in, and the juice is keeping me off this play, but I just don't know if the Mammoth at this point with what we're kind of seeing this kind of streak that they're in should be really laying over a goal. So they're playing the Warriors, and I wish that it was maybe they were laying a goal against a team who hasn't also kind of been on a bit of a skid in the Warriors case. So I lean getting a 1.5 goals with the Warriors, but the trade of Tyson Gibson, how is that going to shake out for the Mammoth? That could probably add a little bit of boon to their game as well. So, I just didn't see if there was anything that really screamed, hey, here's some value to me as far as the NLL slate. Anything that kind of stood out a little bit more to you? Do you have anything that you would maybe stamp on a best bet or just maybe some matchups that you're eyeing this week, Hutton?
Yeah, I have one best bet that I'll get to, but I think the interesting thing is the trade deadline. I mean, some of these moves we did not see happening. The Tyson Gibson one was huge. They drafted him number 1 overall 2 years ago. It was kind of a debate whether it was going to be him or Andrew Q, who's now in the Firewolves. They draft him number 1 overall. He won Rookie of the Year before the COVID shutdown, and they trade him to the Mammoth. That one left me scratching my head. They get back Tyler Digby. They get Ron John, who's also a really capable rookie, and they get a draft pick. So the return was fair, but to move one of those pieces, I think that's a huge win for the Mammoth. And I think he's going to make an instant impact. But going off the trade deadline, a lot of teams made moves, and it kind of actually turns me off of them, even the teams that, presumably got better. The Seals added Brett Hickey from the Wings. I think that he's going to be a big piece. Dawson Theed from Panther City now goes to Halifax. Halifax had already made a move for Sean Evans. So a lot of these moves make these, top teams better, but I need to wait and see kind of how the chemistry works. I don't know if I necessarily want to play, some of these teams that made moves. Seals -1.5 against a Mammoth team that will be on their second game of the weekend. That's one that I'm maybe looking at. I'm leaning, Seals. The juice is -135 right now on DraftKings, so maybe wait till BetMGM comes out. Might be able to get a little bit better value there. Swarm, they added Steph LeBlanc, kind of to add some depth to that right side. So I don't know. They're playing a Firewolves team, though. Is he really going to push them over the edge? I don't know. So a lot of these trades, I think, have made these teams a lot better going into the postseason. I just don't think there's that much value from a betting perspective. But as I mentioned, there is one best bet that I really do like this weekend. And Panther City, I mentioned, they've gone 3-0 the past 3 games. They ended up scoring the most goals for a single team this whole season, ironically, with 20 last week. And just a shellacking of this Rush team. And they're playing Calgary. And the last time they played Calgary this year, it's 13-12. They covered that 1.5. They're getting the 1.5 again. It's -105, so it's not even that much juice to lay. I think you put a half a unit on the money line at +150 and half a unit on their spread and ride it out. I think this Panther City team is playing way better. Trading Dawson Theed is a little bit, hurts a little bit. He's a big part of that defense, but I think they're going to be just fine against a Calgary team that hasn't really been that impressive either. So it's kind of an ugly game to bet on. Neither of these teams are really looking like, playoff contenders. Panther City and Calgary, I think I still probably have a chance, but their chances are slipping, and they're almost as bad as the Rush, who are now sitting last. So 1 or 2 more losses from these teams and they'll be out. But we can still bet on them in the meantime.
I love it, and it doesn't take me much to say, oh, yeah, I'll bet on an underdog. That works for me. I'm going to split up, do a little half unit on Panther City, getting the 1.5. I'm going to ride with Hutton, do a little half unit on them on the money line as they're rolling a little bit. So if you want to give us your best plays of the week, just hit that request button. We'll have you hop on into our space, and you can let us know what you're thinking. But in the meantime, while you can drop your requests in there, to recap, we like Panther City getting the 1.5 and maybe a little sprinkle on the money line as well. In the box side of things, we also, on the field side of things, in NCAA action, Justin and I both co-signing Utah +5.5, and Hutton and I both co-signing Notre Dame laying the 2.5. So let's eat this weekend. Appreciate you tuning in and listening to Bet On Lacrosse. Want to remind you, you can always like and check us out here. Obviously, our Bet On Lacrosse handle. Check us out at Pro Lacrosse Bets as well. But that's our thoughts on the NLL and NCAA slate. And before we wrap it, we'll throw in one little ender here. We got Billy C, who's always joining in and giving us great plays on Twitter, always being super active. So I'm glad that he requested in to join in here as well. So Billy C, you're going to get the final word, man. What are you thinking? You always do a great job with these write-ups on Twitter. So much analysis. You got market stuff you're studying. So, Billy C, we appreciate you, man, listening into the entire space. What are you eyeing this week as you're betting on lacrosse?
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for having me. Huge fan of the pod. Huge fan of the sport. Looking at Friday, I like Hopkins. They're now -3.5 on DraftKings. I think they had a great game against Syracuse last week. Also going with you guys on the Notre Dame to get right over Michigan, -2.5. Had them last week. It was a tough beat. They gave up 5 man-up goals, lost by 3, had them, to win by 2. So that was a bit of a brutal beat, but definitely like them to get right against Michigan. And then I'm hopping on the Wahoo train, +1. I'm going to do similar to what Hutton did, enough on the spread to cover the money line bet.
Love it.
Yeah, definitely.
I'm going to kick you out of the space. You're going against me, Billy. What the hell? No, I'm just messing with you.
No, I know. I just think that, last year when the national championship and they were an underdog, I thought that was some disrespect and took them on the money line in the national championship last year. And I'm thinking they still have their best player in Schellenberger, and Maryland, doesn't have Bernhardt anymore. So very similar teams. Also what JB was saying about, them doing the little things, like their ride is unbelievable, and that will wear a team down.
Great points you make there, man. JB, what do you got for Billy?
No, I love it. Yeah, they do the little things right. that's why I love UVA. They've got Lars Tiffany's a great coach, and they play they look like they're having fun out there, and that's why I really respect UVA lacrosse, and that's why I think they're going to get that dub on Saturday.
Yeah, definitely. That all the little things right, the ground balls, the ride, and yeah, I think UVA is the train to be on this year. I have a future on them to win it all, plus 425. So
Schellenberger for Tewaaraton, by the way.
Is there a market for Tewaaraton? That would be cool.
There isn't, but that would be awesome. That's actually a really good idea. We gotta maybe start chirping at. Have you seen any of those markets, Hutton? Any on any? Because I know you got people all over the place.
I wish they did. I mean,
that
maybe
would be awesome.
Like a offshore book or something. I don't really look there, but DraftKings, BetMGM, nothing yet. I hope they add them. I feel like they just aren't comfortable knowing.
Yeah.
To set those lines.
Set those. Looking at at the championship future right now, Virginia's down to 400. So that's cool that there's some movement on it. I probably will be looking to maybe hedge it later in the season once somebody else stands out a bit more as a clear contender for sure.
Yeah, I wish I would have gotten on a little bit earlier. I mean, I don't think they've gone down too much, but I feel I would be feeling pretty good right now about that, because especially if you like them to win this weekend, it's only going to get, the value's only going to get sucked out more. So that's why I'm kind of hoping whoever loses this game, their odds get a little bit longer so I can, put my future in there. That's why I'm kind of waiting for this game. They're both 6-0, so you're kind of buying them at the top of the market if you're trying to buy them right now. So hoping that they kind of dip a little bit, whoever loses. But
also loved your point about if you're in Virginia and getting the non-state teams to win. Unfortunately, I'm up in Boston, but if I was down there, I would definitely be looking to do something like that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm in Jersey, so that's why I'm excited. Hopefully, that Princeton and Rutgers continue to play strong, and then from Virginia. So if I go back down there, I might have to play something down there and hopefully get that runner-up little ticket thing too. It's very interesting. Shout out to Reese Belcher for pointing that out to me, because I did not realize that. And it makes sense too. There's really no other way you could score it if I mean, I guess you could score it as a push, but these books, they want your money, so they want to incentivize you to place a future. So It's very interesting. So if we get a Rutgers, Princeton, Virginia, and anybody else Final Four, that would be great.
Hutton will be all pumped up for that. Well, Billy, man, appreciate you hopping in. Appreciate you listening in. And keep those plays coming on Twitter, man. We love seeing it. We love the interaction. That's what it's all about. We're all going to continue to grow the game together. So I hope you cash all your tickets this weekend, except your Virginia. I'm rooting for you on every single one of them except for that. But thanks for hopping in.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, guys. It was great.
Appreciate you, brother. So there it is. We got on both of our Twitter spaces, boys, we got a live listener hopping in with us. That's what it's all about. Want to remind you, Justin Byers, he's with FOS, a business writer, does a terrific job. He's even been breaking news. Whether Ian Rappaport wants to give FOS crew, a nod or not, they're the ones breaking the news, doing a great job with FOS Sports. Justin, thanks again for hopping.
We're coming for them. We're putting them on notice, baby.
That's what I'm talking about. They got eyes everywhere. So for JB, for Hutton Jackson, I'm Dan Alexander. Thanks again for tuning in. We'll talk to you next week on Bet On Lacrosse.